Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 13 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Vancouver Canucks and lost by a score of 3-2. And so the San Jose Sharks' 3-game winning streak will officially come to an end with the loss here tonight. We'll have to start taking down the party decorations and the streamers, as at least for now we'll be putting a pause to the Stanley Cup parade planning. With that being said, I actually don't think the Sharks actually will be all that disappointed with the way that they played here tonight. I actually thought they were relatively solid. You know, when it comes to San Jose, it is quite clear that on paper they're not a very good team. I'm not Einstein for pointing that out. And while you could say, well, they might be better than like Anaheim or Chicago, especially with a healthy Macklin Celebrini in the lineup, it is quite clear against the majority of the field here in the NHL, like the Canucks, the opponents for the Sharks here tonight, that the Sharks will be coming into these games as the underdog as long as the other team actually shows up to play. But then they have the choice to make. They can either collapse under that pressure and then put up terrible games like they did against the Jets and the Golden Knights, where the other team just skates circles around them, or they can get sticks in lanes, they can keep pucks to the perimeter, they can get pretty good goaltending, and that will give them an opportunity to at least be competitive in these games against some of the better teams in the league, like the Canucks or like earlier this season against the Dallas Stars. They're not going to be winning many games in this fashion, and probably not even going to be winning a decent amount of games, but could they actually have a chance? That is indeed the case. So while the Sharks will be satisfied, I would say, with the way that they played throughout most of this game, I don't think that they'll be all that happy with the way this one actually ends up finishing out. These last few minutes are going to be a bit of a stinger, at least in the moment, for the San Jose Sharks roster. Why is that the case? Well, we start off in the first period, as it would be a 0-0 game after 20 minutes. The Canucks would have the majority of the possession time and the zone time, but the Sharks keep it to the outside, so while Blackwood had to be good, he didn't have to be all that great standing on his head in that situation. In the second, it would actually be the Sharks who would strike first with a goal from Nico Sturm to make it 1-0, but the Canucks would tie it up with a goal from Pius Suter, and it would be 1-1 going into the third. In that third period, the first 15 minutes of it would go scoreless, and so it seemed as though we would be destined to head to that post-regulation play into the 3-on-3 overtime until it would be Jake DeBrusk getting the tie-breaking goal to make it 2-1. However, we have seen just a few games ago against the Utah Hockey Club that the Sharks, they can be particularly deadly in the 6-on-5 situation, and it's Mikael Granlund specifically stands out in that way. And with his patented Mikael Granlund classic move, which is just a simple shot through a screen, but a seeing eye shot at that, he manages to beat the Canucks goaltender to tie this game up at 2 with about a minute to go. And so once again, it seemed as though we were destined to that 3-on-3 overtime play. But the Canucks immediately respond on the very next shift, get back into the offensive zone, and the Sharks, they cannot handle that pressure, and with just 30 seconds to go, they give up yet another go-ahead goal to make it 3-2 Vancouver. And the action wasn't even done there, as the Sharks, trying to get back into this one in the dying seconds of the third, would actually get a good look on net. Willie Macklin from behind the goal line feeds a pass in front to Zetterlund, who was just unfortunately not able to catch that pass, and that would do it for the game. So indeed, the Sharks not going to be happy with the last few minutes of this game, but generally I don't think it was all that bad, and so they lose it 3-2. Moving on to the players to talk about, we didn't have any substitutions at forward in and out of the lineup. Dellandrea remains out with injury, and then neither Costin nor Giovanni Smith are a particularly interesting insert to the lineup at this point, but we did get a swap, which I'll get to a little bit later. But we start off instead with the Sharks' top line of Eklund, Granlund, and Toffoli. As I have mentioned many times in the past, expected to be able to lead the offense for San Jose, and you could argue for sure that they managed to do so in the previous game against Chicago, but they didn't manage to do so here tonight. They had maybe one really good shifts right at the end of the second period, about 60 to 90 seconds working in the offensive zone, but it didn't actually lead to all that great of a chance. And then, of course, they managed to work their magic in the 6-on-5, but when it came to the actual 5-on-5 even strength play, they were more often than not forced to defend in their own zone. When it comes to Tyler Toffoli, he had been one of the Sharks' better players in each of the last couple of games, but not the case here tonight. Relatively invisible throughout most of this game. He did have a slick play on the Mikael Granlund goal. I will give him that. But besides that, not really a lot doing for number 73. When it comes to the line mate on the other side, the other wing, we have William Eklund, who had also been very effective over each of these last couple of games, but didn't manage to work his same level of magic below the goal line in the offensive zone here tonight. Just couldn't seem to find those same openings, and so it was a tough one. Honestly, he couldn't even find his way into the offensive zone, if we're being honest. And so this first line, not really doing much of anything. And then when it comes to Mikael Granlund, you obviously have to commend him for being able to put up this goal that gets the game-tying one. It's huge. It's obviously very, very important, even though it doesn't actually end up sticking. But when it came, again, like I mentioned with the other two players, to the general 5-on-5, Granlund, not super impressive. And so this first line, definitely not the Sharks' best line on the night. Relatively below average, even, I would say. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, we have Zetterlund with Wenberg, and it is Ethan Cardwell who actually ends up taking the place of Danil Gushchin. Now, this was a bit of a surprise, but also not so much. I don't actually think Gushchin was that great in these last couple of games. He was fine. He was doing his job. It was okay, but as like a top 6 forward, maybe Warsofsky is hoping for more. And so, because Cardwell had been rather solid on a fourth line role in these last couple, and even actually managed to set up a couple of chances as well, he decides to actually give him the opportunity on this second line. And the early returns for this were not good at all. For the first 2 periods of this game, this was likely the Sharks' worst line of the night. They were constantly having to play in their own zone. They were on for extended shifts. There really wasn't anything doing there. In the third period, it did begin to look up at least slightly. In particular, when it comes to Ethan Cardwell, he actually got a couple of really good looks in that third period, perhaps even could have put up a goal, which would have been very nice to see. His first career goal it would have been, but that doesn't really overrule the first 40 minutes that were really quite bad. And even with those 2 chances considered, the third period still wasn't that great for this second line. So I don't know if this is actually a long-term solution moving forward. It is seemingly very possible that Cardwell will get swapped back down. Whether he ends up back on the fourth line is up in the air. Honestly, if I was going to promote Cardwell, I would not have tried him in the second line. I would have kept Gushchin there. I would have probably instead put him on the third line with Cunnin and Will Smith. But it does seem as though Warsofsky is hesitant to do so, primarily likely because not only is Goodrow going to be like a nice little defensive option, I guess, for Smith to shield him a little bit, but also he has Goodrow taking some of the face-offs, likely on Will Smith's weaker side. So without Goodrow there, if you put someone like Cardwell, who is not a center, maybe you think you're going to just not be able to get enough possession in that particular situation. But I don't think that Cardwell on the second line is really a long-term move here for Warsofsky. It was a nice experiment for sure, and I do like that he was given the chance throughout this entire game to show off, but the early returns not great. When it comes to the other 2 line mates here, as I said, the second line not looking very good. Zetterlund was rather invisible through most of this game. Didn't really do a lot besides maybe like one moment where he actually stood out, but still, that's not good enough. And then when it comes to the centerman on this line, Alex Wenberg, also not doing much. He had some setups there with Ethan Cardwell in that third period to set up those 2 couple of chances. But again, besides that, you're definitely hoping for more here. And so while Danil Gushchin might not be the best possible optimal option that gives you the perfect second line, it's quite clear that at the moment, compared to the other personnel that the Sharks have available, he seems to be the correct choice. When it comes to the Sharks' third line, we have Will Smith with Goodrow and Cunnin. So indeed, Will Smith gets the game. He's not given a day off after having put up 2 goals in the previous one against the Chicago Blackhawks, so logic does prevail in this situation. However, obviously we were hoping that Will Smith would be able to build off of that performance, not necessarily by scoring another 2 goals or even a hat trick in this game, but at least get a bit more offense flowing here. And he started off okay. Just a few minutes into this game, he actually had a strong connection with the newest San Jose Shark defenseman Timothy Liljegren, who, by the way, it is apparently pronounced Liljegren, not Liljegren, at least according to him, and I would imagine he knows how to pronounce his own name. So there was a strong connection there that Smith ended up having a good give and go, but then after that, there really wasn't a lot doing. Could you blame his 2 line mates for not really providing much of an offensive spark? Yeah, probably. But still, I don't think Smith looked individually that great in the first couple of periods like he did at least last game. And then in the third, we had sort of a up and down style of play. Will Smith did get a very good chance to actually get the go-ahead goal with a few minutes left in this third period after a bad Vancouver Canucks giveaway in a similar type of situation where if he had managed to hit the net, snipe this one, that would have gotten that one on the board, but unfortunately he misses the net. And then we go to the last 4.5 minutes of this third period onto this Jake DeBrusk goal. It is actually Will Smith who makes two bad turnovers that lead to this one. So first, it is at the tail end of a San Jose Sharks power play. Will Smith seemingly has a pretty simple pass to Luke Kunin, and a short one at that. This is not going across the ice, but he actually puts it behind Kunin, which ends up leading to this giveaway, gives the Canucks possession. But that's not the end of the world. A few seconds later, Will Smith would get the puck back in the neutral zone, and the simple play here is to get to the center line and then send it in so that it's not an icing and your team can actually go for a change. But Smith is unable to do so, at which point you have two options. First, just get it down the ice, ice the puck. It's not great, it's not optimal, but at least it's not going to end up in the back of your net instantly on that very same shift. Or you could try to go for the more skill play, which is to chip it behind the defense, but not with enough power that it gets to the goal line and ends up being an icing. And Smith decides to go in that direction. But in a 1-1 game with 4.5 minutes left, if you're going to make that play, you have to make sure that it is 100% going to work. But instead, he doesn't get enough juice on this one. It is so soft that the Canucks are able to not even have to turn back in their own zone to get it. They pick it up almost instantly. They catch the Sharks defense changing because they think Smith is going to get it down the ice, and it leads to a Brock Besser breakaway. And while that wouldn't actually be the goal-scoring goal, as it would actually end up hitting the post, it would be a few seconds later during the general scramble on the ice due to that it would be Jake DeBrusk who steps in and puts the Canucks up 2-1. Not the eventual game winner, but the one that really put this game on the rocks for San Jose. So definitely a major mistake there from Will Smith, a learning opportunity for sure. When it comes to his two line mates, I'll start off with Barclay Goodrow. He also had a major mistake here, this one on the actual game-winning goal. After the Sharks had tied it up, obviously they can't come out immediately on the next shift with Granlund and these types of guys again. So to defend against what the Canucks might do, they end up sending out what Warsofsky considers to be the infallible duo of Luke Kunin and Barclay Goodrow. He relies on these two guys heavily on a lot of these defensive zone shifts. But it turns out, while these guys have been decent enough defensively this season, they definitely can't compete all the time in this area. And we see Barclay Goodrow, who has a great chance to be able to clear the puck in his own zone. He fails to do so, and it ends up in the back of the net just a few seconds later. So sometimes even the veteran players could end up making these types of mistakes. It's not just Will Smith who stands out in that particular area. On the offensive side of things, Barclay Goodrow continues to not really provide much of anything. He did actually have the pass that led to the really good Will Smith chance in the third period, but not so much off of his own work, but mostly just because the Canucks essentially handed it right to him. So I'm not going to commend Goodrow for that area, and it still seems as though Goodrow's best place would be on the Sharks' fourth line, but as I mentioned earlier on, likely due to the face-off situation and all that, it's not really the way Warsofsky is currently going. On the other side of, however, we do have Luke Kunin, who has been a good bit better. If there was one of these two players that did have to remain with Will Smith, I would definitely choose Kunin. While there is still a cap to his offensive capabilities, there were a couple of times this game where Kunin had the puck, and I'm thinking, okay, this is the moment to take a nice pass over here, but he ends up either going for a very simple play, or he ends up giving it away because he maybe either doesn't notice it or doesn't think he's able to actually pull it off. That is the case, but he still works hard. He can still generate some offensive chances. I still think he's an okay complement to Will Smith, so it's not the end of the world. It's actually been quite nice to see Luke Kunin, who was honestly one of the Sharks' best players here tonight, I would say, probably in the top 4 to 5 in terms of forwards, and it's been nice to see his turnaround, because last year Luke Kunin was bad, and that's even an understatement, because he was very, very bad, to the point where I didn't even want him to be brought back on a contract, and I was disappointed when Mike Greer did give him that 1-year deal. But now, honestly, it wouldn't be the end of the world. While Luke Kunin is not optimally playing in a third line position, when the Sharks actually, in a year's time, or if they're more healthy and bring up a couple of guys, I wouldn't be all that upset to see Luke Kunin in a fourth line role, because he's been mostly solid throughout much of of this season. When it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, we have Grundstrom and Sturm being joined by Gushchin. Like I said, he got dropped from that second line, and he actually ended up taking this demotion in stride. I thought also Gushchin, like Cunnin, was one of the Sharks' better players here tonight. He actually had a decent look in the first period when the Sharks were mostly prevented from actually getting much offensive zone time at all. He had a couple of other really strong looks in the second period, and obviously, of course, it still ends up being the case where it's one thing to actually get the chances, and it's an entirely different thing to actually score on those chances. But in terms of a fourth line especially, it is still making something look good. So this fourth line I actually thought was probably the best line for the San Jose Sharks on the night, and Gushchin definitely up there. I also very much appreciated Gushchin winning that battle with Quinn Hughes, who is not only one of the Canucks' best players, but actually one of the best defensemen in the entire league. He manages to knock Quinn Hughes off of this puck and take it for himself. It's something that Gushchin has honestly managed to do a few times this season, likely more so than a few of the other players on the San Jose Sharks who you would think would succeed more in that particular area. This was supposed to be a little bit of a weakness of Gushchin's game due to his size, but he has taken that in stride for sure, and has actually managed to win a lot of these battles that you don't really expect him to do, and especially against a player you would think would completely outmatch Gushchin in that area. So nice to see, and I thought this was a good game. Definitely enough if Warsofsky wants to go in that direction. Hopefully he does, to earn him a spot back on the second line for next one, especially since the second line clearly had a steep fall off with Cardwell there. No offense to him. I thought he was decent enough, but just not really good enough for a second line role. When it comes to the other fourth liners here, I thought Sturm had a really strong start to this game. Obviously he managed to score. Not a great third period, but still rather solid start. And then Carl Grundstrom, very much the same thing. I actually thought he had a couple of decent shots on net in the first period. Nothing extremely dangerous, but still working it on net, getting the shots there. It's decent for a fourth line for sure. Second period also pretty good. Third period, like I said, with Sturm, fell off a bit, but still ends up making up a strong fourth line for the Sharks on the night. When it comes to the Sharks' defense, we have these three pairings that at least they started the game with, but it underwent multiple changes throughout. And this was a little bit weird on the surface because it was expected that with Liljegren coming into the Sharks roster, that would be the opportunity to separate Ferraro and Ruda, but they were actually kept together, at least at the start. But then at the first commercial break, perhaps, I don't know if Mike Greer phoned down and said like, hey, what are you doing? I got you a new defenseman. And so Warsofsky actually ended up swapping, but it then ended up being Liljegren with Ferraro, Thrun with Ruda, and then Wallman with CC still. But then we saw Wallman get injured a little bit, or at least get hurt. He would return to the game, but for the start of the second period, the defensive pairings would undergo yet another change, and instead it would be still Thrun with Liljegren, but it would be CC with Ferraro and Ruda with Wallman. And don't get me wrong, I will say that CC is a step above Jan Ruda when it comes to puck moving ability, but it still isn't really addressing the actual issue, which is that both Ferraro and CC now in that position are still very much defensively minded defenseman, while someone like Liljegren, who was just added to the team, seems to be the very obvious solution. It's like if Ryan Warsofsky kept trying to solve 1 + 1 and he kept coming to the answer of 4, and then finally you give him the hint, you give him Liljegren on the roster and you say, here, this is clearly the move, and he goes, oh yeah, 1 + 1, it equals 3, and then he swaps CC with Ferraro, and you're thinking like, it seems like it's very obvious on paper what the Sharks should decide to go with here. And when it ends up being the case with CC and Ferraro is that they are hemmed in their own zone a decent amount. And while I definitely thought it was above where Ferraro and Ruda have been, because they actually kept things to the perimeter, it wasn't exceptionally dangerous when they were on the ice, they still had the problems clearing the pucks out of the zone, and it was just not necessarily a super pretty sight. So again, it seems like it is a very obvious direction for pretty much everybody involved for the Sharks to take, except for perhaps Warsofsky. When it comes to Jake Wallman, relatively unpredictable game as per usual for Wallman. I don't think offensively he was necessarily all that great here tonight, and while he wasn't terrible defensively, he did have a couple of bad giveaways, in particular on the first goal for the Vancouver Canucks. Ends up giving this one away with the pass there that right in front of the net. I think it may have gone off a skate, but it was still not the best choice for Wallman for sure. So I thought he was okay, but not great. When it comes to, I guess I should probably focus on the newest addition here, Timothy Liljegren. I actually thought he was rather good for San Jose. The the ideas about what this type of player was going to bring to San Jose was very mixed. Some people said he was just absolutely terrible defensively. Some said he would be like a great power play quarterback. Some people say he would put up a bunch of points. This is the first game here. He's coming to a new team, a new system, everything like that. And then it also should be kept in mind that he has barely played with the Maple Leafs thus far this season. So some growing pains in this game were to be expected, but the early signs are actually rather good. I thought defensively he played a pretty solid game. Offensively, he didn't contribute much, but he did have that okay give and go with Smith. He kept some pucks alive at the blue line, which was quite nice to see. His power play work as the quarterback wasn't great. There's definitely some work to be done in that area, but all in all, I thought he was rather solid here tonight. And then when it comes to his defensive partner, Henry Thrun, I had mentioned last game, it was Thrun versus Thompson who would get the job. It was likely going to end up being Thrun simply because he is the left-handed defenseman in that situation. However, Thrun, not the best night. He also really wasn't given all that much ice time. It actually wouldn't surprise me that much if Thrun actually got the bench in favor of Jack Thompson for the next game, because it definitely wasn't the type of game that really earns you another lineup spot unless Warsofsky feels like he has to do so. And then when it comes to the Sharks goaltender, we have Mackenzie Blackwood, who gets yet another start here. He's been getting the majority of the starts, it feels like, thus far over Vitek Vanacek, and the numbers obviously back that up as well. I thought he played relatively solid. You could certainly make the argument that he probably could have had a couple of these goals. These are some clean shots that just end up beating him very, very easily. But at the same time, I think the Sharks really had some rough issues in this game from a defensive standpoint on those goals, right? The really bad giveaways that just leave things open like that. And so, yeah, you could say, well, he could have had the DeBrusk shot, but this is a really well-placed one from right and tight with no coverage in front. You could obviously say that he probably should have had the last Suter one, especially in that position of the game. It would have been nice to see him come up with the big save, but I wouldn't put it on Blackwood this one. But that would do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Tuesday, where they'll be facing off against the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they'll be looking to get right back into the win column. Class dismissed.